Check it out with Jessica Lee. I'm here with the Analytics Director from Adobe, George Sadler. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to talk about analytics with you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, because there's so much you can do now with the data is available and doing marketing better, right? And I'm excited to hear about what you have to say about, instead of ABM, you're calling it ABX.
That's right.
Right. So let's hear about that.
Yeah, so Adobe's been on this journey of account-based marketing for 4, 5, 6 years. Mm-hmm. It really is a journey. No brand does it overnight or transforms overnight. But early on, we realized, like a lot of brands, that account-based marketing doesn't really land well with those who aren't in marketing. It sounds like marketing is doing everything, and especially in a B2B world where there's a heavy sales sort of process, it kind of leaves them behind from a strategy or an execution perspective. It just doesn't land well internally. So we started cutting off the marketing component and just calling it account-based for a while, because that was a little bit easier to digest internally. And then about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I ran across an article in the New York Times where an author was talking about account-based experiences. And he was talking about it in the concept of it's more than just marketing, it's selling, and it's a bunch of other things as well. And that really resonated with me internally in the way I thought about account-based programs from my days at Dell. And I knew we had an internal sort of debate over what we were going to call it. So I started floating around this idea of account-based experiences. Turns out it was on brand at the same time. Adobe's all about creating great digital experiences and customer experiences. So it kind of made sense. I tested out the concept in a breakout session in one of our in Adobe Summit 2 years ago, and it really landed well. And mathematically, as an analytics professional, I could put it in an equation. You know, ABX is equal to ABM plus ABS for sales, plus ABC for customer support, plus AB whatever. Right? It's like every, you know, and the vision is it's and the concept that really resonates. It's every brand interaction with that customer should be an account-based experience. You should, and what does that mean? It means we as an organization need to become a customer intelligent organization where every employee, every piece of technology that interacts with that organization should do so with knowing everything we know about that organization up to this point.
Okay.
It's actually hard to do, but conceptually you get, you know, if the customer's if an organization's having a deployment problem or an implementation problem with something we just sold them, we probably don't want to try to sell them something else.
Okay.
If they're calling into customer support and there's a deal on the table and what sales is negotiating, the customer support rep should know about that. Or a great example, back to my previous employer days, I won't name the technology, but it wasn't Adobe. We had it was a big Fortune 50 company, a big account of ours. We had a massive $50+ million deal on the table. We're kind of negotiating, and customer calls in the B2C side of the business. So this was a B2B2C sort of play, and had a warranty issue with a piece of hardware that they had bought. It was a university laptop program, and warranty support went sideways. That student happened to be the child of a C-suite executive at that B2B company. Came home for a visit over the weekend, told them about the experience on the university laptop program, warranty program. Next thing you know, Monday morning, deal goes sideways. Because that executive wants to talk about that warranty issue, not the $50 million deal.
Okay.
And I thought, you know, that's where the light bulb went off with me. We should have known. We should have been a customer intelligent organization. We could have. We could have told that customer support rep that there's a big deal, that this is an important person, because we know even back then we could map GUIDs back to people, back to organizations. That it's even easier today. It's still hard, but it's even easier. And even if we didn't tell that rep that this was an important person and what the deal was, we could have just said, fix their problem. Automatically, we could have told them, give them a new laptop. No questions asked. Would have changed the whole environment. And if we couldn't do that, we could have notified the sales team that someone from that household, that address, called in, had a warranty issue. If you're concerned or want to know more about it, talk to the customer support rep.
I see.
They could have come in armed with, we know about this.
Connecting the dots.
And they could have, instead of getting ambushed by the conversation, they could have come in, hey, we've checked on it, so sorry that happened. We've got a new one out already in the mail, right? Or even here it is. And it would have changed the whole dynamic. And that's what I mean by being a customer intelligent organization, that every brand interaction should take into consideration what you know about that organization and the current state of the relationship with that organization.
Right. It's a broader point of view, not just marketing being responsible, but the sales, the customer support, everybody that touches that customer. But you're talking about more of an organization, like just monitoring and keeping scores of all of the touches from one organization and having that more macro view.
That's right.
Of what's going on and how to interact with that account.
That's right. The non-digital example is our CEO now wants to see the behavioral data that we have about the account, as well as all the sales information and other things and current relationship in his briefing sheet before he goes and meets with the customer. Why? Because he wants to be relevant. Right? He wants to talk about things that are important. He wants to be aware of things that are important to the customer before he has that interaction. And he's come to realize that the information we gather about organizations and how they interact with their marketing material is important context, because it's actually intent data. When an organization, especially in a B2B context, when an organization interacts with your marketing material or your marketing activities, they're telling you they're interested in something.
Yes.
And if you can interpret that behavior, you can understand what they're interested in, and you can be more relevant in the next interaction. That's the concept of account-based marketing, if you will. Right. But it extends to every interaction.
And you're very technical, because I think you told me you can actually build an engine to collect data, look at logs and all that to get intent data.
Yeah. Well, I can hire folks that can do that. I don't know that I can do it myself. I talk to a lot of brands about this concept, big and small, in the B2B space. It can be done in a very scrappy sort of way, or it can be done at scale in Hadoop with machine learning and all that sort of thing. Step one is always in an analytical sort of challenge, is to get the data in one place so you can analyze it. That in and of itself is a challenge. But before we had Demand Base and Dun & Bradstreet and some of these other sort of organizations that will give you web visitor detection data, right? You can buy that identification service. We built it from scratch from weblogs. So you go into the weblog and you get the IP address and you get the date timestamp, and you get the web URL of the page that was visited, and then you start using something like an open service called Whois, and you manually look up the IP address, and Whois will tell you the company, and then you go into your CRM system and you say that company is this company in my system, the name, right? So now you've got the unique identifier in your CRM system. The interesting thing about those IP addresses, they typically remain static. Why? Because IT is lazy.
They don't want to change it.
So once they have a router to the external world, they've got a block of IP addresses, and that's static. Otherwise, they're going to change everything else, right? So once you have identified it, it's like a one-time investment. And if you know the way IP addresses work, 1 through 10 are in sequence. If you've seen 1 and you've seen 10, you can assume 2 through 9 are also. Right? So you don't have to see every single one. So you build this database. And then as you get weblogs, you compare it to the database. The second challenge is understanding what's on the page. Otherwise, you just know they visit your website. Not interesting enough. But if you know what's on the page, then you can say, what are they looking at? And so in a company that has 3 products and 2 business solutions, then maybe you have a matrix that says this page talks about this business solution or this product or both. And then with that matrix and the organizational visits, you can start to ask the question, what is the organization looking at? And when you start to see patterns, then you make different decisions based on what you see, the patterns you see. Turns out when you get into the high end of this in Hadoop and machine learning and all that, that signal, not just the website, but a bunch of other, like emails that you send are also to an organization. If they open the email,
they went to an event,
and you know what's on the email. It's not the fact that they opened the email, but what was that email about? Or what was the event about? Or what was the webcast about? And when you start interpreting it that way, that data set can predict pipeline. And late last year, we took a quarter's worth of data in real time and ran our machine learning model on it after we trained it on the previous 2 quarters worth of data. And we found out we could predict about half of the opportunities the sales team was creating in Salesforce before they created it.
Nice.
By about 10 weeks.
Let's talk about that sales efficiency, optimizing operations and all that. You have a lot of experience in that. Can you share some of the best practices or maybe a story?
I did sales efficiency work when I was at Dell. I'm doing it now in my new role at Adobe. I've talked to peers in tech that are working in the same problems, and what you find is that the same problem pops up over and over again. Mm-hmm. So if you've seen the problem before, you kind of have a head start on where the right answer might be. Lots of organizations have to evolve from hunting to sort of nurturing, if you will. Mm-hmm. Or going after brand new white space accounts when you're early starting out to now I've got these big accounts that I have to manage and maintain the relationship with.
Yeah.
It might even be big enough that I now are more concerned about retaining the revenue I have and thoughtfully growing it than acquiring a bunch of new revenue. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of an apex or a transition point or an inflection point that occurs there. It depends on where you started from. Some companies start with the problem of, I don't know how to acquire new accounts, and some companies start from the problem of, I don't know how to retain the accounts I have. Mm-hmm. I think the answer comes in thinking about the ecosystem, thinking about the whole organization, right? And more importantly, as we're starting to evolve our thinking at Adobe, it's about thinking about the marketing and sales channel and not just the sales channel. And not just the piece parts. So we just acquired 2 companies, Marketo and Magento.
Yes.
They tend to live in a space, they sell into enterprise, but they tend to focus a lot of their historical energy in what we'll call SMB, which is not a space that our legacy sales team on the MarTech side spent time in, because our products at this point don't actually scale down into that space. So we're learning from each other. Right, what they do in SMB is a little different than what we do in enterprise, and what's the overlap, and how do you integrate an organization? Ultimately, it comes down to efficiencies. It comes down to return on investment. An interesting conversation to be had around thinking about the investments you make in marketing versus the investments you make in sales. Right, the old world way of thinking about things that. I have 2 investment options. I can either give marketing more money to drive demand, or I can give sales more money to close demand. And where is my capacity constraint? And where am I going to get the most efficient yield on my return? It's the way the CFO is going to think about things. Mm-hmm. It gets harder when you start thinking about an ecosystem and an integrated approach from an analytics perspective. How do you evaluate the effectiveness of this versus that when in fact it's this plus that coming together? Mm-hmm. And I find that a lot of business professionals have a hard time thinking in a nonlinear sort of way, right? Thinking about partial attribution, thinking about econometric models, thinking about the impact of something they can't see and touch and feel. Mm-hmm. And that's the world we're moving into in B2B. It's a space that B2C has been living with very comfortably for a long time. Right, because in B2C world, especially in e-commerce sort of transactions, not in store, but actually in commerce, you spend money in digital, you get visitors to the website, you have to assume some conversion rate, so many of those are going to convert on your website to a dollar value, and then you got to evaluate the effectiveness of your spend. They very quickly get to a point where they have to do partial attribution and econometrics and a bunch of other things to kind of evaluate the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. They can't actually see the linearity of things. But in B2B, we grow up in this world where marketing did some stuff and then sales took over. And you could track activity and see linear flow through the pipeline. That paradigm is being stressed by digital marketing in the B2B space. Yeah. And I see B2B companies 3 to 5 years behind B2C. And I think the leading B2B companies are going to get to that space where they feel comfortable with the math a lot sooner than the other ones will. And that's where they'll have the advantage, because they'll be able to believe in the answer that marketing plus sales together and this combination of investments plus the strategy is actually yielding a dollar value on the other side.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's no longer just this linear journey, because you can have that prospect researching marketing content getting a demo from sales,
Yeah.
but then not do anything else with sales, but continue to learn, read the analyst report, talk to the peers. You know, they do a lot more things that marketing actually touch.
That's right.
Right, and then they go back to sales. So
That's
it goes
right.
back and forth.
That's right. I've talked to brands where they said marketing doesn't create anything. It's all sales, right? I know we all know from research that more than half of B2B buyers, first off, they're committees. They're not individuals typically.
Right.
Most buying committees, more than half, have already made a brand decision before they talk to the first sales rep.
Yes, there's a
Which
short
flies
list.
in the face of what sales thinks in general, which is I create all the opportunities and I close all the business. When in reality, half of the companies have already made that decision. So we know that. What we've learned over the last 2 years at Adobe is that the behavior, customer behavior we're observing proves the same point. So we see surges in behavior on a topic on our first-party data. We're not the Bombora data we buy or other intent data, but the first-party data we look at, our own marketing interactions. We see surges in organizational behavior on something that becomes pipeline 10 weeks before it becomes pipeline. So I could tell the sales rep, you're going to create an opportunity in this account before they've even talked to the customer. It's before the first form gets filled out online even. And that's because of this. So it confirms the research that brands already know, companies already know the brands they want to shortlist at least. Right. They probably do a lot of their research through their social networks and their peers. What do you use? How do you know? They do all that sort of thing. They do their own research online. And that's the signal that we're picking up on the web, right? And they use third-party research like Forrester, Gartner, sort of Magic Quadrants and other sorts of things to triangulate on the short list at least. And then they start talking to the brand.
Yes.
And typically they'll start talking to the brand in the marketing side before they start talking to the sales side. So, but what's interesting, we did our first customer journey sort of evaluation where we're putting this data. When we first started putting this data together, it was very hard. It took us weeks to put together a picture of one deal. But when we stepped back, it was a multi-solution, $5+ million deal. When we stepped back, a big brand, we saw the behavior, and we saw a couple of things. We saw thousands of visits to our website during the deal cycle. They didn't stop when sales got engaged. In fact, they continued, but the content shifted, right? The behavior starts to shift. We saw another thing. We saw over 100 form fills during that deal cycle. I went to the marketing team and said, only one of them got credit. So even within marketing, it's like, well, there were 100 forms, all from different programs and things. But our attribution system set up to give credit to one thing. It's a last touch sort of perspective. We're evolving our thinking now. But the marketers could say, and oh, by the way, 25% of them were executives. So we've got executives filling out forms. That was another counterintuitive that executives don't fill out forms. The other thing we saw was that certain content surged late in this deal cycle. Content we thought would be used early on during the kind of awareness consideration, its business use cases, ended up surging late. Hypothesis, they were looking for ROI. Because in the buyer journey, that's the point where they're internally selling.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so somebody's looking for the business case that says this is what it's going to be worth to us. So we started rethinking our content strategy because of that.
Okay. Very good.
And then we started talking to sales. This is what landed with Brad Rencher, our GM. He said, I finally get it. That picture of all these touch points and what it was, it's complex. And so now we can have a complex analytical discussion or take an approach you can't see because they get it. It's not one thing. It's an ecosystem. It's a bunch of folks pulling together.
Right. And having the data to then make better decisions of how you influence those touch points.
Or even just to prove the point that it's not as linear as you think.
Yes. Well, it's been a great conversation, George. There's so much to learn and there's so much to do, and the technology enables you to do a lot more now in this whole journey.
Yeah.
So appreciate you being on the show.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Take it out with Jessica Lee, George Sadler from Adobe.
Thank you.